The Alpha of Thornwood casts out his hollow daughter during a public whipping, only for the Frost King of the North to interrupt the 16th lash with a claim of ownership. The whip cracks before the sun even touches the horizon. Lyra grips the wooden post, splinters piercing her palms, and refuses to scream. She is being punished with 12 lashes for spilled wine, a testament to her worthlessness in the eyes of the Thornwood pack. Among the jeering crowd, she sees the dark, intimidating arrival of the Iron Peak delegation. Their leader, Vane, doesn't look through her like she is glass. He looks at her with eyes the color of a winter storm, catching a scent that makes his nostrils flare in recognition.
Welcome to Alpha King Romance Diaries, where passion meets power and love always reigns supreme. This channel is your escape into powerful love stories, deep emotions, and irresistible alpha energy. Hit subscribe and join the kingdom. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned, the fun is just getting started.
The whip cracked, a sharp, predatory sound that tore through the pre-dawn silence of the Thornwood pack square. Lyra gripped the rough-hewn wooden post, her knuckles white and bleeding where splinters dug into her skin. She didn't scream. She hadn't screamed since she was 6 years old, the day she realized that her father, Alpha Garrick, didn't view her cries as a plea for mercy, but as a confirmation of her weakness. "One," the enforcer intoned, his voice devoid of pity. The leather strap had sliced through her thin tunic, biting into the flesh of her shoulder blades. The morning air was biting, a frost clinging to the stones of the square, but the fire blooming across her back was a different kind of cold, a numbing, searing heat. From the periphery of her vision, shaded by the heavy stone arches of the Great Hall, she saw him. Kalen. The Beta's son stood half-hidden in the shadows, his jaw tight, his hands balled into white-knuckled fists at his sides. Their eyes met for a fleeting, agonizing second. In his gaze, she saw the same thing she had seen for years, a mixture of desperate love and paralyzing cowardice. "Don't look at me," she pleaded silently. "If you look at me, they'll see." "Two," the enforcer barked. The second strike landed lower, crossing the first in a cruel X. Lyra's knees buckled, but she forced them straight. She was the hollow one, the daughter who couldn't shift, the girl whose wolf remained silent while the rest of the pack roared. To her father, she was a stain on the Thornwood legacy. To the pack, she was a convenient vessel for their frustrations. 12 lashes for spilled wine, a woman's voice jeered from the small crowd of onlookers. It was Mira from the kitchens, her face twisted in a sneer. "The Alpha is too kind. A mongrel like that should be driven out, not fed." Lyra focused on a single crack in the stone beneath her feet. She counted her heartbeats, trying to find the rhythm that would carry her through the pain. She thought of the secret meetings in the old mill, of Kalen's whispered promises that he would claim her during the Ember Moon, that he would protect her once he had his own authority. But as the third and fourth lashes fell, Kalen did not move. He did not step into the light. He remained in the shadows, a witness to her degradation, safe in his silence. The betrayal hurt more than the leather. As the fifth lash fell, Lyra realized that the crumbs of affection he gave her were merely the price of her silence, a way to keep his conscience clean while she bled for them both. She closed her eyes, the copper tang of blood filling her mouth, and waited for the sixth. The 12th lash finally fell, leaving Lyra's back a roadmap of fire and blood. Her head hung low, her hair shielding her face from the mocking eyes of the pack as the enforcer untied her wrists. She didn't collapse. With a trembling, agonizing effort, she pulled her shredded tunic over her shoulders, the fabric instantly staining crimson. She was a ghost walking among the living, moving toward the Great Hall to begin her morning chores, for even a bleeding daughter was expected to serve. The heavy oak doors of the hall were thrown open, but not by the servants. The sound was like a thunderclap, vibrating through the stone floor and rattling the iron sconces. A sudden, unnatural chill swept through the room, killing the warmth of the hearth fires. Then he entered. Alpha Vane did not simply walk, he took possession of the space. Draped in heavy furs the color of a midnight storm, the Frost King of Iron Peak moved with a lethal, predatory grace that silenced the room instantly. Behind him followed a cadre of warriors, men built like the mountains they called home, their eyes hard and scanning for threats. But it was Vane who held every gaze. He was taller than any man in Thornwood, his presence so massive and cold that the air seemed to crystallize around him. Lyra's father, Alpha Garrick, rose from his high seat at the end of the hall. Normally, Garrick was a man of imposing stature, a wolf who ruled through fear and iron-fisted authority. But as Vane approached, a strange transformation occurred. Standing near the Frost King, Garrick looked suddenly frail. His shoulders seemed narrower, his posture less certain. The authority that usually radiated from him like a physical heat was snuffed out by the sheer, glacial power of the man before him. Garrick was a king of a small forest. Vane was the master of the world's end. Lyra pressed herself against the cold stone of the side wall, hopping to vanish into the shadows. But as Vane reached the center of the hall, he stopped. He didn't look at the Alpha. He didn't look at the high table laden with the morning's feast. His head turned slowly, his silver-blue eyes cutting through the gloom of the hall until they landed directly on her. For the first time in 19 years, Lyra felt something other than the sting of the whip. She felt a strange, electric pull, a recognition that bypassed her skin and settled deep in her marrow. Vane's nostrils flared, his chest expanding as he drew in the scent of the room, his gaze narrowing on the bloody fabric clinging to her back. In that moment, the great hall of Thornwood felt like a cage that had suddenly grown too small, and the predator had just realized there was something inside worth taking. The heavy, oppressive silence that followed Alpha Vane's entrance lingered long after the Frost King had been escorted to the high guest chambers. Lyra retreated to the shadows of the old grain mill at the edge of the Packlands, the only place where the scent of dust and damp earth drowned out the metallic tang of her own blood. Every movement was a fresh agony, her tunic sticking to the raw furrows on her back, but the physical pain was a dull throb compared to the frantic beating of her heart. Lyra. The whisper came from the darkness behind a stack of burlap sacks. Kalen stepped forward, his handsome face etched with a guilt that he wore like a shroud. He reached out as if to touch her, then flinched away, his eyes dropping to the crimson stains blooming through her clothes. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, his voice a ragged tremor. "Seeing you up there, I wanted to kill them all. I wanted to tear the whip from his hand." Lyra leaned against a wooden pillar, her breath hitching. "But you didn't, Kalen. You stayed in the shadows." "I have to," he hissed, stepping closer until she could smell the familiar scent of pine and rain that usually brought her comfort. "If my father suspects I've been seeing you, he'll move up the timeline for my mating to Aloan. Everything I've worked for, every bit of influence I'm trying to gain to protect you, it would be gone." He reached out then, his fingers brushing the hair away from her damp forehead with a tenderness that felt like a lifeline. "Listen to me. The Ember Moon is only 3 days away. I've already spoken to the elders in secret. As soon as the moon reaches its zenith, I will stand before the pack and claim you. I don't care that you're hollow. I don't care that my father wants a Beta bloodline. I'm going to take you away from this." Lyra looked into his eyes, wanting so desperately to believe the dream he was weaving. For years, these whispered promises had been the only thing keeping her upright. She imagined it. The ceremony, the public declaration, the moment her father's power over her finally snapped. She saw a life where she wasn't the pack's punching bag, but a woman held in the arms of a man who loved her. "You promise," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "You won't let them hurt me anymore." "I promise," Kalen said, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her brow. "Just 3 more days, Lyra. Hold on for 3 more days and I'll give you the life you deserve. No more whips, no more hiding, just us." As he slipped back into the trees, Lyra closed her eyes, clutching his words to her chest like a shield. She let the false warmth of his promise wrap around her, unaware that the crumbs he offered were only meant to sustain her until the moment he truly had to choose. For a brief, shimmering moment, she allowed herself to believe that a future without pain was finally within her reach. The following afternoon, the Great Hall was a hive of frantic activity as the pack prepared for the arrival of more dignitaries. Lyra moved through the chaos like a shadow, her body stiff, and every breath a reminder of the raw furrows beneath her fresh tunic. She was on her knees, scrubbing the wine stains from the stone floor near the hearth, when a pair of polished leather boots entered her field of vision. "You missed a spot, mongrel." The voice was like silk stretched over a blade. Lyra didn't need to look up to know it was Elowen. The daughter of the pack's wealthiest elder, Elowen was everything Lyra was not. A powerful shifter with a coat the color of autumn gold and a status that made her untouchable. Lyra kept her head down, her brush moving in steady, rhythmic circles. "I'll get to it, Elowen." "That's Lady Elowen to you," the other girl snapped, kicking the bucket of soapy water. A gray wave splashed over Lyra's hands and the hem of her clothes. Elowen leaned down, her perfume, cloying and expensive, choking the air. "I saw you slinking toward the old mill last night. Do you really think he goes there to see you?" Lyra's heart faltered, but she forced her voice to remain flat. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elowen let out a sharp, mocking laugh that drew the attention of several nearby servants. "Oh, little hollow bird. You think Kaelin's secret visits are a sign of devotion. He comes to me first, you know. He spends his nights in my quarters, tasting real wine and planning a future that involves a mate who can actually run beside him in the woods." She reached out, catching a lock of Lyra's hair and tugging it just hard enough to make the wounds on Lyra's back pull. "He tells me how much he pities you. He says looking at you is like looking at a broken tool, useless, but too sad to throw away until the new one arrives. Why do you think he hides you in the dark? Because a man like Kaelin only shows the world what he's proud of, and he is very, very proud of me." Lyra felt the crumbs of hope she had gathered the night before begin to turn into ash in her mouth. She wanted to scream that he had promised to claim her, that the ember moon would change everything, but the cold certainty in Elowen's eyes anchored her to the floor. "Enjoy your scrubbing," Elowen whispered, leaning in so close her lips brushed Lyra's ear. "The ember moon is for wolves, Lyra, and you are nothing but a ghost in a girl's skin. Don't be surprised when the lights go up and he forgets you ever existed." As Elowen swept away, her laughter trailing behind her like a poisonous mist, Lyra looked down at her reflection in the dirty water. She looked small, shattered, and painfully alone. For the first time, the dream Kaelin had painted felt less like a future and more like a cruel, beautiful lie. The sting of Elowen's words followed Lyra into the narrow, shadowed corridors behind the Great Hall. Tasked with refreshing the lavender sachets in the Alpha's private study, she moved with the silent caution of a creature that had learned to exist in the peripheral vision of predators. She was reaching for the heavy oak door when the muffled sound of voices stopped her cold. "The Frost King is not here for a simple diplomatic visit, Garrick," a voice hissed. It was the Beta, Kaelin's father. There was a sharp, jagged edge of anxiety in his tone that Lyra had never heard before. "He's been watching the girl. I saw him in the courtyard. He doesn't look at her like a piece of refuse. He looks at her like he's searching for a ghost." Lyra froze, her hand hovering inches from the wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the sound so loud she feared it would give her away. "He can search all he likes," her father, Alpha Garrick, growled. The sound of a glass decanter hitting a tray punctuated his words. "The girl is wolfless, a hollow vessel. There is nothing in her that reflects the lineage he's looking for." "But the blood debt, Garrick," the Beta countered, his voice dropping to a low, frantic whisper. "If he discovers what really happened 19 years ago, if he finds out that your mate didn't die of a fever but was silenced because of who her true kin were, he won't just take the girl. He'll burn Thornwood to the ground." Lyra's breath hitched. A fever. That was the story she had been told her entire life. Her mother, a frail woman from a wandering pack, had succumbed to illness shortly after Lyra's birth. It was the reason, they said, that Lyra was born broken. "Enough," Garrick roared, the sound of a fist slamming onto a desk vibrating through the door. "That secret is buried in the same unmarked grave as her mother. We did what was necessary to protect this pack's purity. The Ashford bloodline has no place in Thornwood. As far as the world is concerned, she is my mistake, a mongrel daughter of a nameless wolf. After the Ember Moon, when I officially disown her and cast her to the rogues, the last link to that debt will be severed forever." Lyra backed away, her legs feeling like water. Every pillar of her reality was crumbling. She wasn't just a disappointment, she was a witness to a crime she hadn't known existed. The Hollow girl wasn't a mistake of nature, but a hidden threat to her father's throne. As she turned to flee back into the safety of the servants' quarters, the weight of the truth felt heavier than any whip. She wasn't just fighting for love or survival anymore. She was a living debt, and her father intended to pay it in her blood. The morning air was a shroud of gray mist, biting and sharp as it rolled off the distant peaks. Lyra retreated to the stone terrace overlooking the valley, the only place where the suffocating secrets of the Great Hall couldn't reach her. Her back was a map of agony, each movement pulling at the half-dried scabs beneath her tunic, but the cold was a mercy. It numbed the fire in her skin and the frantic spinning of her mind. She thought she was alone until the air changed. The scent of cedar, ancient ice, and something dangerously magnetic filled her lungs. A wolf who hides in the shadows usually has something to fear. A deep, resonant voice vibrated through the mist. "But you aren't a wolf, are you, Lyra?" She spun around, gasping as the movement sent a jolt of white-hot pain through her shoulders. Alpha Vane stood by the balustrade, his massive frame cutting a terrifying silhouette against the dawn. He wasn't wearing his heavy furs. In his simple tunic, the sheer corded muscle of his arms was visible, radiating a heat she could feel from 5 feet away. "I am a servant of Thornwood, Alpha," she whispered, dropping her gaze to his boots. "I shouldn't be here." "You are the daughter of this house, yet you smell of blood and old wood smoke," Vane said, stepping closer. The gravel crunched beneath his weight, a slow, deliberate approach. He stopped just inches from her, forcing her to look up. His silver-blue eyes weren't mocking. They were searching, stripping away the layers of her carefully built armor. "I saw him last night, the Beta's son. He meets you in the dark, doesn't he?" Lyra flinched as if he'd struck her. "Kaelin, he cares for me. He's going to claim me at the Ember Moon. He's my only hope." Vane's expression didn't soften. If anything, his features turned to granite. Hope is a dangerous thing when it's built on a foundation of cowards. A man who truly claims a woman does not do it in the silence of a grain mill or the shadows of the woods where no one can witness his choice. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek. He didn't touch her, but the heat from his palm made her skin prickle. "Listen to me, little bird. Love is not a secret to be kept like a sin. It is measured by what people do in the light when the world is watching and the stakes are highest. If he hides you now, he will abandon you when the sun rises." "You don't understand," she choked out, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm hollow, I have nothing else." "You are many things, Lyra of Thornwood," Vane murmured, his voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated in her very marrow. "But hollow is the lie they told you to keep you small. The mountains do not care for pack politics, and neither do I look for the truth in the light, or the darkness will swallow what's left of you." He turned and vanished into the mist as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Lyra trembling in the cold, the first seeds of a terrifying doubt taking root in her heart. The night of the Ember Moon arrived with a heavy, suffocating heat that seemed to press the very breath from Lyra's lungs. The sacred circle was a clearing of ancient stone, illuminated by dozens of towering bonfires that sent sparks spiraling into the black sky like dying stars. Hundreds of wolves stood in a wide, silent ring, their eyes reflecting the amber glow of the flames. Lyra stood at the very edge of the light, her heart a frantic bird battering against its cage. She had dressed in her cleanest tunic, her hair brushed until it shone, clutching Kaelin's promise like a talisman. Across the circle, she saw him. He looked magnificent in his ceremonial leathers, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. Beside him stood Aloan, draped in shimmering silks, her golden hair crowned with wildflowers. Alpha Garrick stepped into the center of the ring, his voice booming over the crackle of the wood. "The moon is at its zenith. Let the sons of Thornwood claim the mates who will strengthen our blood and lead our future." Lyra's breath hitched. This was it. Kaelin had told her to wait for the signal to trust him. Kaelin stepped forward into the center of the circle. For a heartbeat, his gaze flickered toward the shadows where Lyra stood. She took a half step out of the darkness, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips. "Come for me," she whispered in the silence of her mind. "Show them I am yours." "I, Kaelin, son of the Beta," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "claim my mate by blood and law." He turned, reaching out his hand. Lyra felt the world tilt on its axis, but But Kalen's hand didn't reach for her. He turned his back to the shadows and offered his palm to Aloan. "I claim Aloan of the Golden Line," he declared, his voice never wavering. "May our union strengthen the pack for generations to come." The circle erupted in a roar of approval. Aloan stepped forward, her face a mask of triumphant cruelty, and pressed her hand into his. As they joined, Kalen finally looked back at Lyra. There was no apology in his eyes, only a cold, hollow relief. He had chosen the light. He had chosen the power. The roar of the pack turned into something sharper, something jagged. Faces turned toward Lyra, the hollow girl standing alone at the edge of the firelight. A low titter of laughter started at the front and spread like a contagion. "Did you see her face?" someone jeered. "The mongrel actually thought she'd be a beta's mate." "A hollow servant for a future leader," another mocked. "She's lucky he even lets her scrub his floors." Lyra stood paralyzed as the mockery washed over her, more caustic than any acid. The crumbs of hope she had lived on were gone, leaving her starving and exposed. She looked at Kalen, the man who had kissed her brow in the dark, and realized Vane was right. Love kept in the shadows was never love at all. It was just a way to hide the shame. As the pack's laughter rose to a deafening pitch, Lyra realized she wasn't just betrayed. She was utterly, dangerously alone. The laughter of the pack died away, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like the onset of a winter storm. Alpha Garrick stepped forward, his face illuminated by the orange flicker of the bonfires. He looked at Lyra not with the eyes of a father, but with the cold detachment of a man disposing of a broken tool. "The Ember Moon has spoken," Garrick's voice boomed, echoing off the ancient stones. "A pack is only as strong as its weakest link, and for 19 years we have carried a weight that does not belong to us. Lyra, born of my blood but denied the spirit of the wolf, you are a hollow stain upon the Thornwood legacy." Lyra stood frozen, her gaze flickering to Kalen. He stood beside Aloan, his head bowed, refusing to meet her eyes. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. "From this moment forward," Garrick continued, his voice rising in power, "I strip you of your name, I strip you of your rank. You are no longer my daughter. You are no longer Thornwood." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. To be disowned was a death sentence. To be cast out without a wolf was a lingering execution. But Garrick was not finished. He turned to the lead enforcer, a man whose scarred arms were already reaching for the heavy, silver-tipped whip. "A severance of blood must be sealed in blood," Garrick declared, his eyes burning with a dark, hidden urgency, the fear of the debt he had mentioned in the study. 20 lashes, not for discipline but for expulsion. Let her blood return to the earth and let her be forgotten. The enforcers seized Lyra, dragging her toward the stone post at the center of the circle. She struggled, her heels dragging in the dirt, but she was nothing against their shifting strength. They bound her wrists high above her head, stretching her body until her toes barely touched the ground. The raw, half-healed wounds from the morning's lashing screamed as the fabric of her tunic was yanked downward, barring her back to the freezing night air and the heat of the fires. "The debt is paid," Garrick muttered, loud enough only for those on the inner circle to hear. The enforcer stepped back, winding the silver-tipped lash around his fist. The crowd leaned in, a predatory hunger in their eyes. Lyra closed her eyes, praying for the first time that her heart would simply stop before the leather could tear her apart. The whip hissed through the air, a sound like a serpent's strike. It landed with a sickening crack, the silver tips tearing deep into her flesh. Lyra's body convulsed, a ragged, broken sob finally escaping her throat. This was the end. She was being erased, one stroke at a time, while the man she loved watched from the light and the father who hated her smiled in the shadows. The 16th lash never landed. The air in the sacred circle didn't just turn cold, it froze. A sudden, violent gust of wind swept down from the northern peaks, extinguishing half the bonfires in a spray of dying embers. The enforcer's arm was caught mid-swing, held by a hand that looked like it was carved from granite. Alpha Vane stood between Lyra and the whip, his presence so massive he seemed to eclipse the moon itself. With a single, effortless twist, he ripped the silver-tipped lash from the enforcer's grip and tossed it into the dirt as if it were a piece of filth. Enough! Vane's voice didn't just carry. It commanded the very earth to stand still. Alpha Garrick surged forward, his face contorted with rage. This is Thornwood business, Frost King. You have no standing in our rites of severance. The girl is a mongrel, a hollow mistake of my own blood. Your blood, Vane turned, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, glacial intensity. He stepped toward Garrick, and for the first time, the Thornwood Alpha actually recoiled. You have spent 19 years trying to bury a debt in the skin of a girl you were supposed to protect. You call her hollow because your own soul is empty. Vane turned back to the crowd, his voice rising to a roar that silenced the whispers of every wolf present. Look at her eyes. Look at the silver that burns within them. You claim she is a servant, a mistake. I claim she is the lost daughter of the Ashford line, the child of my own uncle, stolen and hidden away by a man too cowardly to admit he murdered her mother for her secrets. Shock rippled through the clearing. Kalen looked as though he had been struck, his face turning a sickly ash-gray as he looked at the girl he had just abandoned. Vane reached out, his large, warm hands undoing the bindings on Lyra's wrists. As she slumped forward, exhausted and broken, he caught her against his chest, shielding her shredded back from the wind with his heavy fur cloak. The heat of him was staggering, a furnace of safety in a world of ice. I am the Alpha of the Iron Peak, Vane declared, his gaze sweeping over the cowering Thornwood wolves until it landed on Garrick. And I do not recognize your severance. You cannot cast out what you never truly owned. By blood and by the ancient laws of the mountain, I claim her. He looked down at Lyra, his expression softening into something fierce and protective. This one is mine, he whispered, loud enough for every soul to hear. And if any of you wish to finish what you started tonight, you will have to step through me to reach her. No one moved. No one breathed. Vane lifted Lyra into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all, turning his back on the Thornwood pack and walking toward the dark, jagged horizon of the north. The journey to the peaks was a blur of freezing wind and the steady, rhythmic thrum of Vane's heartbeat against Lyra's ear. When they finally reached the Iron Peak Fortress, a monolith of obsidian and ice, Vane did not take her to the dungeons or the servant quarters. He carried her to his private sanctuary, a room at the highest point of the mountain where the air was thin and the stars felt close enough to touch. He laid her face down on a bed of thick, soft furs, his touch as light as falling snow as he applied a cooling salve to her ravaged back. Lyra drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, haunted by the image of Kalen's betrayal and the sting of the whip. But every time she whimpered, a low, grounding rumble would vibrate through the room, Vane, sitting in the shadows, his presence a constant shield. On the third night, the fever broke. Lyra sat up, the silk sheets sliding down her skin. The pain in her back had transformed from a sharp scream into a dull, pulsing heat. It wasn't just her wounds that felt hot. Her entire body felt as though it were being forged in a furnace. The mountain is calling to what is inside you, Lyra. Vane's voice came from the balcony. He stood in the moonlight, his silver eyes glowing with anticipation. Stop fighting it. The Thornwood wolves told you that you were hollow to keep you from realizing you were a storm. Lyra stood, her legs trembling. She felt a pressure behind her ribs, a wild, ancient energy that she had suppressed for 19 years out of fear and shame. It wasn't the silence of a missing wolf, it was the patience of a goddess. She looked at her hands, which were beginning to glow with a faint, iridescent light. I'm scared, she whispered. Don't be, Vane said, stepping toward her. I am here, and the world is about to see exactly who they tried to break. The snap of her bones wasn't a sound of agony, but of liberation. Lyra fell to her hands and knees as a blinding white light erupted from her soul, filling the room with the scent of ozone and ancient ice. The hollow space in her chest expanded, shattering the invisible chains that Alpha Garrick had used to bind her spirit. When the light faded, the girl was gone. In her place stood a creature of myth, a massive wolf with a coat of pure, shimmering silver that moved like liquid moonlight. Her eyes were no longer just silver-flecked. They were brilliant pools of molten mercury. This was the silver bloodline, a predator of the high peaks, a wolf of the stars thought to have vanished from the world centuries ago. Lyra lifted her head, her new form feeling powerful and infinite. She let out a howl that shook the very foundations of the fortress, a sound of pure, unadulterated sovereignty. She was no longer a servant. She was no longer disowned. She was the mountain's chosen, and her reign had just begun. The gates of the Iron Peak fortress groaned open to admit a single, travel-worn rider. Lyra watched from the high battlements, her new senses sharp enough to catch the scent of pine and stale sweat from a mile away. It was a scent that had once been her only comfort, her only hope. Now it smelled like stagnation and old lies. Kaelin looked small against the obsidian walls of Vane's stronghold. When he was ushered into the solar, he was trembling, his eyes darting around the opulence of the room before landing on Lyra. She was standing by the hearth, draped in white furs that matched the shimmering silver of her hair. She didn't look like the girl who had scrubbed his floors. She looked like the mountain itself, ancient, cold, and immovable. "Lyra," Kaelin choked out, taking a step toward her before the low, warning growl of a guard stopped him. "Thank the ancestors you're alive. I've been in an agony of regret since that night. I didn't want to leave you, I swear. My father." He forced my hand. Lyra didn't move. "Regret is a luxury of the living, Kaelin. I was nearly a ghost when you left me to the whip." "I came to take you back," he said, his voice rising with a desperate, frantic energy. "I've made a deal with the elders. If you come back now, I'll claim you. Eloin means nothing to me. We can tell them the Frost King took you by force. We can go back to how it was." Lyra looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel the sting of his betrayal. She felt a profound, hollow pity. She realized that Kaelin hadn't come to save her. He had come to save his own conscience. He wanted the hollow girl back because she was a secret he could control, a woman who would look at him with gratitude for the crumbs he dropped. "Go back to how it was?" she asked, her voice calm and terrifyingly clear. "To the shadows, to the cellar, to the man who watched me bleed and didn't move a finger because he was afraid of his father's frown." "I was protecting our future," he cried. "No," Lyra said, stepping into the light. The iridescent glow of her silver bloodline hummed beneath her skin, making her eyes burn like molten mercury. "You were protecting yourself. Vane told me that love is measured by what we do in the light. You only ever loved me in the dark because you were too weak to stand beside me when the sun rose." Kaelin recoiled, finally seeing the power radiating from her. He saw the marks of the silver wolf in her gaze and realized the broken tool was actually a queen. "Go home, Kaelin," she said, turning her back on him to look out at the snow-capped peaks. "Thornwood is a cage of your own making. I don't belong in the dark anymore. I belong to the mountain." As the guards escorted the sobbing Beta's son from the room, Lyra felt the last tether to her old life snap. She wasn't a secret anymore. She was a storm. The Great Hall of Iron Peak was a cathedral of ice and fire, its vaulted ceiling open to a sky dominated by a moon so bright it turned the snow-capped world to diamond. All the alphas of the northern territories were assembled, a sea of fur, leather, and predatory eyes. They had come to witness the impossible, the return of a bloodline that had been whispered of only in legends. Lyra stood at the threshold, her hand resting lightly on Vane's arm. She wore a gown of shimmering white silk that flowed like a frozen waterfall, but it was not the dress that commanded the room. It was the way she carried herself. The stoop of the servant was gone, replaced by a spine of iron and a gaze of molten mercury. As they walked toward the center of the hall, the crowd parted. Lyra saw her father, Alpha Garrick, standing near the back. He looked smaller than she remembered, his face a mask of pale, sweating terror. He had spent 19 years trying to bury the silver bloodline, and now it stood before him, radiant and unyielding. Vane stopped at the center of the dais, his voice booming with the weight of the mountains. "Alphas of the North, you were told that the Ashford line ended in blood and ash. You were told that the Hollow One of Thornwood was a mistake of nature." He turned to Lyra, his expression softening with a pride that burned hotter than the hearth fires. "Tonight, the moon bears witness to the truth. Lyra Ashford, born of the Silver Line, has claimed her spirit. She is my mate, my equal, and the sovereign of the peaks." A ripple of awe and disbelief moved through the hall. Lyra stepped forward, leaving the safety of Vane's side to stand alone before the assembly. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the ancient, powerful pulse of the silver wolf within her. When she opened them, her pupils were ringed with iridescent light. "I spent 19 years believing I was broken," Lyra said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to the furthest corners of the hall. "I believed that my silence was my shame, but the mountains do not reward the loud, they reward the enduring." She looked directly at Garrick, then at the other alphas who had once looked through her as if she were glass. "I am not a debt to be paid or a secret to be hidden. I am the silver in the dark, and I am finally whole." Above them, the moon reached its zenith, its light pouring through the open roof to bathe Lyra in a celestial glow. In that moment, the entire North bowed, not out of fear, but in recognition of a power that could no longer be denied. Lyra felt Vane's hand find hers, warm and steady. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was reigning. Somewhere deep in her soul, the silver wolf lifted its head and let out a long, triumphant howl that echoed across the territories, announcing to the world that the queen had returned.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Don't forget to leave a comment and tell us what you think about the story. We love hearing from you. Your support helps keep this channel alive and bringing you amazing, interesting, and powerful alpha stories. Thank you for being here.